She said, "Relax, it's just a dance," while grinding on her ex at her sister's wedding, so I left before dessert. Now her ex blocked her, her family's humiliated, and she's desperate for me back. Looking back, I can see how the foundation of our relationship was already cracking long before that disastrous wedding night. I met Sophia 3 years ago at our college reunion in Boston, where I was working as a structural engineer and she managed social media for local restaurants. We seemed like perfect opposites, my analytical nature balancing her outgoing personality, my careful planning complementing her spontaneous energy. For the first 2 years, it worked beautifully. I'd spend my days analyzing load-bearing calculations and stress points in buildings, while she crafted Instagram posts and organized promotional events for trendy gastropubs around the city. Our differences felt complementary rather than divisive, and I genuinely believed we were building something solid together. She'd laugh at my engineering jokes that nobody else understood, and I'd listen to her animated stories about difficult restaurant owners and social media algorithm changes. But everything started shifting about 8 months ago when Blake entered the picture. He was her high school ex-boyfriend who'd apparently become some hotshot real estate developer, and he began showing up at the fitness studio where Sophia taught weekend yoga classes. At first, she mentioned him casually, almost dismissively. "You remember Blake from high school? He's taking my Saturday morning class now." Still as full of himself as ever. I didn't think much of it initially because Sophia had always been friendly with everyone, and Boston's a small enough city that running into people from your past isn't unusual. But then the mentions became more frequent, and her tone started changing. "Blake says the restaurant industry is oversaturated and I should consider pivoting to real estate marketing. Blake thinks I'm wasting my potential with these small accounts. Blake mentioned this networking event downtown that could really help my career." I started noticing how she'd light up when his name came into conversation, how she'd unconsciously fix her hair or check her reflection when talking about him. The woman who used to curl up on my couch every Sunday morning, perfectly content to read the newspaper and plan our week together, suddenly became restless and critical. "Don't you ever want more than this?" she asked one evening, gesturing around my apartment like it was some kind of prison. Blake's already bought his second investment property, and he's only 31. The comparisons started innocently enough, but they cut deeper each time. My steady engineering salary, which had always been enough for both of us to live comfortably, suddenly became evidence of my lack of ambition. My preference for quiet dinners at home became proof that I was boring. My careful approach to major decisions became a character flaw rather than thoughtful consideration. "You analyze everything to death," she complained after I suggested we research vacation destinations instead of booking the first expensive resort she found online. "Sometimes you just have to take risks and see what happens." But the real change was in how she started treating my concerns. When I mentioned that she seemed to be texting more during our date nights, she'd roll her eyes and accuse me of being clingy. When I asked about the late-night networking events that coincidentally started happening right after Blake's yoga classes, she'd get defensive and lecture me about trust issues. "I can't help it if you're insecure," she'd say with this condescending tone that made me feel like I was being unreasonable for wanting basic transparency in our relationship. The woman who used to share every detail of her day was suddenly guarded about where she'd been and who she'd seen. Her phone, which used to sit casually on our coffee table, became something she clutched protectively and took with her to the bathroom. I found myself second-guessing my own instincts, wondering if I really was being possessive or if something legitimate was happening that she didn't want to discuss. The worst part wasn't even her growing distance. It was how she made me feel guilty for noticing it. Blake wasn't just any ex-boyfriend randomly reappearing in Sophia's life. He was the one who'd apparently gotten away, the high school golden boy who'd chosen college in California over maintaining their teenage romance. Now he was back in Boston as a successful real estate developer, driving a Tesla and wearing expensive suits to yoga classes like some kind of corporate peacock. I learned more about Blake's background from Sophia's stories than I ever wanted to know. He'd built his wealth flipping properties in emerging neighborhoods, had connections throughout the city's development scene, and possessed the kind of effortless confidence that came from never having to worry about money. Everything I wasn't, in other words. The fitness studio where Sophia taught became Blake's regular weekend hangout, though I noticed he rarely seemed to break a sweat during her classes. Instead, he'd position himself in the front row where she could see him, making comments about her excellent form and natural teaching ability that sounded more like flirtation than fitness feedback. Blake thinks I should start private coaching sessions, Sophia mentioned one Sunday, her voice carrying that excited energy she used to reserve for talking about our future plans. He says I'm too talented to waste on group classes with beginners. I looked up from the engineering journal I was reading. Private sessions with him? Well, he'd be my first client, obviously. He's willing to pay premium rates. The way she said it made it sound like some incredible business opportunity rather than her ex-boyfriend finding excuses to spend one-on-one time with her. But when I suggested she might want to establish clear professional boundaries, she accused me of trying to sabotage her career growth. Blake's influence extended far beyond the yoga studio. Suddenly, Sophia's Instagram feed filled with photos from upscale networking events and industry mixers that I'd never heard her mention before. In these pictures, Blake appeared with increasing frequency, always positioned just close enough to Sophia to suggest intimacy without crossing obvious lines. Business networking, she'd explain when I asked about these events. Blake introduced me to some restaurant owners who might need social media consulting. But the photos told a different story. There was Blake's hand resting on the small of her back during a downtown mixer. Blake leaning in to whisper something in her ear at a rooftop bar. Blake and Sophia laughing together at some exclusive restaurant opening, both of them dressed like they were attending a romantic dinner rather than a professional event. I started feeling like a stranger in my own relationship, watching my girlfriend's life unfold through social media posts rather than hearing about it directly from her. The worst part was how Blake seemed to understand exactly what he was doing. During the few times I encountered him at the fitness studio, he'd greet me with this overly friendly demeanor that felt calculated and condescending. "Nathan, great to see you, man. Sophia's told me so much about your engineering work. Really important stuff, keeping buildings from falling down." His tone carried just enough subtle dismissal to make me feel small while maintaining plausible deniability if I called him out on it. He'd ask about my little projects, while casually mentioning his latest property acquisition or investment opportunity. The contrast was deliberate and humiliating. Sophia, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to Blake's passive-aggressive behavior toward me, or perhaps she simply chose not to see it. When I tried to explain how uncomfortable Blake made me feel, she'd sigh dramatically and launch into lectures about my supposed insecurity issues. "You're threatened by successful people," she said after I mentioned Blake's condescending comments. "Maybe instead of being jealous, you should ask yourself why his confidence bothers you so much." The gaslighting was masterful. Every legitimate concern I raised about Blake's obvious intentions became evidence of my character flaws. Every observation about their increasingly inappropriate dynamic became proof that I needed to work on my trust issues. She'd twisted the narrative so completely that I started questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I really was being paranoid or possessive. But the evidence kept mounting. Sophia's late-night texting sessions, which she claimed were work-related, often coincided with Blake's social media activity. Her sudden interest in expensive restaurants and exclusive events aligned perfectly with Blake's lifestyle suggestions. Her growing criticism of our quiet, stable relationship echoed themes I'd heard Blake discuss during his yoga class monologues about seizing opportunities and not settling for mediocrity. I realized I was watching my girlfriend slowly transform into someone I didn't recognize, and Blake was the architect of that transformation. The announcement of Sophia's sister Emma's wedding in Martha's Vineyard should have been a joyful occasion, but it immediately became another source of tension in our deteriorating relationship. Emma had always been the responsible sister, working as a nurse while saving for a modest ceremony that her family could actually afford. Unlike Sophia's Instagram-worthy lifestyle aspirations, Emma wanted something simple and meaningful with close family and friends. I'd grown fond of Sophia's parents over the years, especially her father, who appreciated my practical nature and often asked my opinion about home repair projects. When Emma mentioned they were struggling with transportation logistics for elderly relatives, I volunteered to coordinate shuttle services from the ferry terminal. I also quietly contributed $1,500 toward the venue costs when I overheard Sophia's mother expressing worry about their budget constraints. It felt good to help a family that had always treated me with genuine warmth and respect. The wedding planning brought out the best in everyone except Sophia, who seemed annoyed by the whole affair's lack of sophistication. "It's so basic," she complained while looking at Emma's Pinterest board of simple decorations. Blake's sister had her reception at the Four Seasons. Now that was a real wedding. I watched her parents exchange glances across the kitchen table, clearly uncomfortable with Sophia's entitled attitude toward her sister's special day. But the real bomb dropped during a casual family dinner 3 weeks before the ceremony. Emma was going through the guest list when she mentioned that her fiancé had invited his college roommate. "You remember Blake, right, Sophia? From high school? Tom roomed with him sophomore year." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia's fork froze halfway to her mouth, and I felt my stomach drop as the implications became clear. Blake would be at the wedding. My girlfriend's increasingly obvious crush would be present at an event where alcohol would flow freely and romantic atmosphere would be unavoidable. "Oh," Sophia said, trying to sound casual. "I didn't realize Blake and Tom were that close." Emma shrugged innocently. "They kept in touch after graduation. Tom says Blake's doing really well in real estate now." I watched Sophia's face carefully, noting the slight flush in her cheeks and the way she suddenly became very interested in her salad. Her mother noticed too, glancing between Sophia and me with obvious concern. The tension in the room was palpable, but only Emma seemed genuinely oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around her innocent announcement. That night, Sophia was unusually quiet during our drive home. I waited for her to bring up Blake's attendance, to acknowledge the awkwardness of the situation or discuss how we might handle it. Instead, she stared out the window and pretended nothing significant had happened. It wasn't until the following week that she addressed it at all, and when she did, it was through attack rather than discussion. "I need you to promise me something about the wedding," she said over coffee, her tone suggesting this was non-negotiable rather than a request. "Promise you what?" "Promise you won't create drama if Blake brings a date or if we end up talking. I don't want my sister's wedding ruined because you can't handle basic social situations." The accusation hit like a slap. She was preemptively blaming me for potential problems that hadn't even occurred yet, making me the villain in a scenario where her ex-boyfriend's presence was the actual complication. I stared at her across our kitchen table, realizing that she'd already been planning how to navigate Blake's attendance, probably fantasizing about seeing him in a romantic setting. "I wasn't planning to create any drama," I said carefully. "But because this is Emma's day, and I won't let your insecurity issues overshadow it." The gaslighting was complete. According to Sophia's version of reality, I was the problem for potentially being uncomfortable with her interacting with Blake at a wedding, rather than her being the problem for obviously wanting to interact with him. She'd successfully reframed the entire situation to make me feel guilty for emotions I hadn't even expressed yet. The final week before the wedding was filled with Sophia's increasingly transparent excitement about the event. She spent hours shopping for the perfect dress, getting professional makeup consultations, and researching the venue's layout like she was planning a military operation. When I suggested we could drive up together and maybe explore the island the day before the ceremony, she quickly shut down the idea. "I need to help Emma with last-minute preparations," she said, though Emma had already told me everything was handled by her wedding planner. "You should just meet me there for the ceremony." Even her own family noticed the change in her behavior. During our final family dinner before leaving for Martha's Vineyard, Sophia's father pulled me aside while she was in the bathroom. "You're a good man, Nathan," he said quietly. "I hope you know that." The weight of his words suggested he understood more about the situation than he was willing to say directly, and I realized that Sophia's parents had been watching their daughter's transformation with the same concern I'd been feeling for months. The oceanside venue was everything Emma had dreamed of, simple white chairs arranged on the bluff overlooking the Atlantic, with string lights creating a magical atmosphere as the sun began to set. I arrived early to help with last-minute setup, finding genuine satisfaction in ensuring the elderly relatives had comfortable seating and the photographer had clear sightlines. Emma looked radiant in her grandmother's vintage dress, And her fiancé Tom couldn't stop smiling as guests began arriving for the ceremony. For the first hour, everything felt perfect and normal. I sat with Sophia's family during the ceremony, watching Emma and Tom exchange heartfelt vows they'd written themselves. Even Sophia seemed moved by the genuine emotion of the moment, dabbing at her eyes during their unity candle lighting. I allowed myself to hope that maybe the romantic setting would remind her of what actually mattered in relationships: commitment, partnership, genuine love rather than surface-level excitement. The reception moved to a nearby pavilion where the wedding party had decorated tables with simple centerpieces and twinkling lights. I was genuinely enjoying myself, talking with Sophia's cousins about their jobs and laughing at her uncle's terrible dad jokes. Sophia seemed relaxed too, chatting with Emma's nursing school friends and posting tasteful photos of the sunset ceremony. For a brief moment, I felt like we were the couple we used to be, sharing glances across the room and enjoying each other's company in a social setting. Then Blake arrived, fashionably late and wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He moved through the crowd with practiced charm, congratulating Tom with masculine backslaps and complimenting the mothers on their elegant outfits. I watched him work the room like a politician, making each conversation feel exclusive and important. When he finally approached our table, Sophia's entire demeanor changed. Her posture straightened, her smile became more animated, her voice took on a different quality that I recognized from her yoga instructor persona. "Blake, you made it!" she exclaimed, standing to greet him with a hug that lasted several seconds too long. "Wouldn't miss Tom's big day," he replied, his eyes scanning her dress appreciatively. "You look absolutely stunning, Sophia. That color is perfect on you." The compliment was delivered with intimate familiarity, like he had every right to comment on her appearance. I stood to shake his hand, receiving the same condescending smile I'd grown to despise. "Nathan, good to see you again, man. Thanks for helping with the logistics. Tom mentioned you coordinated transportation. Really thoughtful stuff." The dinner conversation flowed normally enough, with Blake regaling the table with stories about destination weddings he'd attended and exotic locations where he'd conducted business. Sophia hung on every word, asking follow-up questions and laughing at anecdotes that weren't particularly funny. I noticed her parents exchanging concerned glances as their daughter became increasingly animated in Blake's presence, transforming into someone who seemed to need his approval and attention. The real disaster began when the DJ started playing slow music and couples moved onto the dance floor. I was about to ask Sophia to dance when Blake appeared beside her chair, extending his hand with theatrical gallantry. "May I have this honor?" he asked, completely ignoring my presence and the fact that she'd come to the wedding with me. I expected Sophia to politely decline or at least acknowledge the awkwardness of the situation. Instead, she practically glowed with excitement. "Of course," she said, taking his hand without even glancing in my direction. I watched from our table as they moved onto the dance floor, telling myself to stay calm and rational. At first, they maintained appropriate distance, swaying to the music while talking quietly. But as the song continued, the space between them gradually disappeared. Blake's hand moved from her waist to the small of her back, pulling her closer. Sophia didn't resist. If anything, she leaned into him, her head tilting toward his shoulder in a gesture of intimate familiarity. By the time the second song started, they weren't dancing anymore. They were grinding, with Sophia pressing her body against Blake's in movements that belonged in a nightclub, not at her sister's wedding reception. The music was romantic and slow, but their dancing was deliberately sexual and inappropriate. I could see other guests noticing, including Sophia's mortified parents who were staring at their daughter with obvious embarrassment. Her mother's face had gone pale, while her father looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Emma, thankfully, was distracted by her new in-laws and hadn't noticed the spectacle her sister was creating on her wedding dance floor. I stood up and walked toward them, hoping that my presence would remind Sophia where she was and who she'd come with. When I approached, she looked directly at me with this strange smile, not embarrassed or apologetic, but almost triumphant. Blake whispered something in her ear that made her laugh, and then she said the words that ended everything between us. "Relax, Nathan. It's just a dance." The dismissive tone, The use of my full name instead of the affectionate nickname she usually used, the way she said it loud enough for nearby tables to hear, it was clearly calculated to humiliate me. She wanted everyone to see that she was choosing Blake over me, that she could disrespect me publicly and expect me to just stand there and take it. I looked at her for a long moment, this woman I'd loved for 3 years, now grinding against her ex-boyfriend at her sister's wedding while telling me to relax about it. The woman who'd called me her partner while secretly planning to betray me at the first opportunity. I didn't say anything. I simply turned around, walked back to our table, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the exit. Behind me, I could hear Sophia calling my name, but her voice carried irritation rather than apology, like I was being unreasonable for leaving instead of watching her continue her public display with Blake. I drove back to Boston in complete silence, my phone buzzing constantly with her messages that I refused to read. The first thing I did when I got back to my apartment was change the locks. I called an emergency locksmith and paid triple rates to have new deadbolts installed at midnight, because I knew Sophia well enough to predict she'd come storming back from Martha's Vineyard expecting to pick up where we'd left off. While waiting for the locksmith, I methodically packed all of her belongings into boxes, her designer clothes, expensive skincare products, the yoga equipment she'd gradually moved into my space over 3 years. I labeled everything clearly and stacked the boxes by the front door, creating a neat pile that represented the end of our relationship. There was something therapeutic about the process, like I was finally taking control of a situation that had spiraled beyond my tolerance. My phone continued buzzing throughout the night with increasingly frantic messages from Sophia. I didn't read them, but I could see the preview text getting longer and more desperate with each notification. By Sunday morning, she'd apparently returned from the wedding because the buzzing intensified, accompanied by phone calls that I let go straight to voicemail. Around noon, I heard her key in the lock, followed by confused rattling when it didn't work. Then came the pounding on my door. "Nathan, open this door right now. I know you're in there." I sat at my kitchen table, calmly eating lunch while she alternated between demanding entry and tearful apologies shouted through the door. "You're being completely unreasonable. It was just dancing. You're acting like a jealous psycho." The irony wasn't lost on me. She was calling me psychotic while having a public meltdown in my apartment hallway. After an hour of her dramatics, I finally opened the door just long enough to point at the boxes. "Your stuff is right there. I'd appreciate it if you'd take it and leave." "We need to talk about this like adults," she said, trying to push past me into the apartment. "Adults don't grind on their ex-boyfriends at family weddings," I replied, blocking her entry. "Then they don't come home expecting their partners to pretend it never happened." The conversation devolved quickly from there, with Sophia cycling through every manipulation tactic in her playbook. First came denial. She claimed nothing inappropriate had happened and I was overreacting to normal dancing. Then blame. She accused me of being controlling and possessive for not allowing her to have friendships with other men. Finally, she tried bargaining, promising that she'd cut contact with Blake if I'd just let her come inside and work things out. But I'd already moved past anger into something colder and more final. Watching her perform these predictable emotional theatrics only reinforced my decision. This was who she really was, someone who would humiliate me publicly and then gaslight me for being upset about it. After she finally left with her boxes, I discovered just how thoroughly Blake had played both of us. Within days, social media revealed the ugly truth about their wedding night encounter. Apparently, Blake had been recording their inappropriate dancing and posted it to his Instagram story with laughing emojis and a caption about old times. The video showed exactly what I'd witnessed, Sophia grinding against him while other wedding guests looked on in obvious discomfort. But here's the beautiful part. Blake's actual girlfriend, whom he'd conveniently forgotten to mention to Sophia, saw the video and immediately dumped him. His social media posts quickly disappeared, and within a week, he'd blocked Sophia on everything and returned to trying to win back his girlfriend. Sophia had humiliated herself and destroyed our relationship for a man who'd been using her for entertainment and social media content. The karma was swift and brutal. Emma called me the Tuesday after the wedding, her voice tight with embarrassment and frustration. "Nathan, I am so sorry about what happened at my reception. I had no idea Sophia would behave that way. My new in-laws are asking questions, and I honestly don't know what to tell them. I assured Emma that none of it was her fault and congratulated her again on a beautiful ceremony. She deserved to enjoy her honeymoon without worrying about her sister's destructive behavior, though I could hear the strain in her voice when she mentioned that their parents were having words with Sophia about her conduct. Meanwhile, Sophia's messages continued flooding my phone with increasing desperation as she realized the extent of her isolation. Blake had blocked her completely after his girlfriend's ultimatum. Her parents were clearly disappointed in her behavior. Even Emma was maintaining distance while she dealt with the fallout from having her wedding reception disrupted by her sister's public display. I watched Sophia's social media presence shift from confident lifestyle posts to increasingly bitter quotes about men not appreciating good women. The woman who'd spent months criticizing my stability and ambition was suddenly posting inspirational memes about knowing your worth and not settling for less. The lack of self-awareness was staggering, but I found myself feeling more relieved than vindicated. Every desperate message she sent only confirmed that I'd made the right choice in walking away. Over the following months, Sophia's attempts to reconcile became increasingly desperate and manipulative, each effort revealing more about her true character than our entire 3-year relationship had. The text messages started immediately after I refused to let her back into my apartment, beginning with angry accusations about my supposed overreaction and gradually evolving into tearful apologies mixed with veiled threats. "You're throwing away 3 years over one stupid mistake," she wrote in a message that perfectly encapsulated her inability to understand what she'd actually done wrong. I was drunk and emotional about seeing Blake again, but it didn't mean anything. "You know I love you." But love, as I'd learned, meant something completely different to Sophia than it did to me. When the texts failed to generate a response, she escalated to showing up at my workplace. I'd be leaving the engineering firm after a long day of structural calculations, only to find her waiting by my car in the parking garage. She'd clearly put effort into these ambush encounters, perfect makeup, outfits designed to remind me of what I was losing, and rehearsed speeches about how much she'd changed and grown from the experience. "I've been going to therapy," she announced during one particularly pathetic parking garage confrontation. "My counselor says I have abandonment issues from my parents' divorce that made me act out for attention. I'm working on it, Nathan. I'm becoming a better person." The psychology speak sounded convincing until I realized she was essentially claiming that her childhood trauma excused her from grinding on her ex-boyfriend at her sister's wedding. Even if her therapeutic insights were genuine, which I doubted, she was still trying to manipulate me into taking her back by presenting herself as a victim of her own circumstances rather than someone who'd made deliberate choices to disrespect our relationship. My favorite manipulation attempt came through voice messages she'd leave during what were obviously wine-fueled emotional breakdowns. These rambling monologues would alternate between self-pity and accusations, often within the same 30-second recording. "I know I hurt you and I hate myself for it," she'd sob into the phone. "But you're being so cold and cruel. The Nathan I fell in love with would never abandon someone he cared about when they needed help." The implication was clear. If I didn't take her back, I was proving that I'd never really loved her. It was masterful gaslighting disguised as vulnerability. She also tried recruiting mutual friends and family members to advocate on her behalf, painting herself as a woman who'd made one terrible mistake and deserved forgiveness. These well-meaning intermediaries would approach me with carefully crafted pleas about second chances and the importance of working through relationship challenges. "She's really torn up about this," her cousin Lisa told me during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "I've never seen her so devastated. She says you won't even talk to her." I politely explained that some mistakes reveal fundamental character issues rather than momentary lapses in judgment, but I could see Lisa didn't understand the distinction. To outsiders, Sophia's public humiliation of me looked like a drunken error rather than the culmination of months of emotional manipulation and boundary violations. The most telling attempt came when Sophia's mother called me directly, her voice heavy with embarrassment and disappointment. "Nathan, I need you to know that your father and I are horrified by Sophia's behavior at the wedding," she said quietly. "We've raised our daughters better than that, and we're struggling to understand what got into her. Mrs. Peterson had always been kind to me, treating me like a potential son-in-law rather than just Sophia's boyfriend. Hearing the shame in her voice as she apologized for her daughter's conduct was almost worse than the original betrayal. "She keeps asking us to convince you to talk to her," she continued. "But honestly, Nathan, I think you deserve better than what she's been giving you lately. I've watched her change over the past year, and it hasn't been for the better." That phone call confirmed what I'd suspected. Even Sophia's own family recognized that her behavior had become unacceptable. Mrs. Peterson wasn't calling to advocate for reconciliation. She was calling to apologize for her daughter's character failures and to let me know that they understood my decision to walk away. The final major reconciliation attempt came 6 months after the wedding, when Sophia somehow convinced Emma to invite me to her birthday dinner under the pretense of clearing the air for family harmony. I almost declined, but my affection for Emma and curiosity about Sophia's latest strategy convinced me to attend. The dinner was awkward from the moment I arrived, with Sophia dressed like she was attending a romantic date rather than her sister's birthday celebration. She'd clearly planned every detail of her appearance and behavior, speaking in carefully modulated tones and making constant references to her personal growth and newfound maturity. "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching," she announced to the table, though her words were clearly directed at me. I realize now that I was taking Nathan for granted and acting out because I was scared of how serious our relationship was becoming. The performance was polished but transparent, especially when she began making pointed comments about regretting her mistakes and hoping for second chances. Emma looked increasingly uncomfortable as her birthday dinner became Sophia's reconciliation theater, while their parents maintained strained smiles and tried to redirect conversation towards safer topics. I listened politely, responded when directly addressed, and left immediately after dessert. Sophia followed me to the parking lot for one final attempt at manipulation, this time dropping the victim act in favor of direct confrontation. "You're really going to throw away everything we built together because you can't forgive one mistake?" she demanded, her carefully controlled facade finally cracking. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this has been for me? People are talking, Nathan. They think I'm damaged goods now." And there it was. Her real concern wasn't the pain she'd caused me, but the social embarrassment she was experiencing as a consequence of her choices. She was angry that I wouldn't help her rehabilitate her reputation by taking her back and pretending nothing had happened. 8 months after the wedding disaster, I was finally living the peaceful life I'd forgotten was possible. No more constant text monitoring, no more expensive dinners I couldn't afford, no more walking on eggshells around someone's fragile ego and endless demands for validation. I'd been promoted to senior structural engineer, started dating a colleague named Rachel who actually appreciated stability and thoughtfulness, and had saved enough money to put a down payment on a small house outside the city. Life felt manageable and authentic again. Then my phone rang from an unknown number, and I made the mistake of answering it. "Nathan? It's Sophia. Please don't hang up." Her voice sounded different, smaller, less confident than the woman who'd once criticized my lack of ambition while spending my money on designer handbags. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I really need closure. I've been in therapy for months now, and my counselor says I need to make amends for the hurt I've caused." I almost laughed at the therapeutic language she was using, like our relationship had been some kind of substance abuse program she was recovering from. But curiosity kept me on the line, wondering what new manipulation strategy she'd developed during our months of silence. "I've learned so much about myself," she continued when I didn't immediately hang up. "About my patterns of self-sabotage and my fear of real intimacy. I realize now that I pushed you away because I was terrified of how much I actually loved you." The psychology speak was more polished than her previous attempts, suggesting she'd either found a therapist who specialized in relationship manipulation or had been practicing these phrases in the mirror. Either way, I wasn't buying it. "What do you want, Sophia?" "I want you to know that I'm sorry. Really, genuinely sorry for how I treated you and for what I did at Emma's wedding. You deserved so much better than that, and I'm not asking you to take me back. I just need you to know that I understand how badly I hurt you." It sounded sincere enough, but then came the inevitable pivot that revealed her true agenda. "I guess what I'm really asking is whether you can forgive me. Not for my sake, but for yours." Holding on to anger isn't healthy, and I hate thinking that I've damaged your ability to trust other people. The manipulative genius was impressive. She was positioning herself as concerned about my emotional well-being while simultaneously fishing for information about my current relationship status. When I didn't immediately respond, she pressed further. Are you seeing anyone new? I hope you are. You deserve someone who appreciates how wonderful you are. The fake magnanimity was transparent, but I decided to indulge her curiosity. Yes, I'm seeing someone. Rachel. She's an architect at my firm. Oh. The single syllable carried more emotion than her entire therapeutic apology. That's great. I'm sure she's lovely. Is it serious? We're moving in together next month. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear Sophia's composure cracking as she processed the reality that I'd not only moved on but was building exactly the kind of stable, committed relationship she'd once mocked me for wanting. That's wonderful, she finally managed, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining her evolved persona. I'm really happy for you both. But the facade was already crumbling. I just think it's interesting that you could commit to someone else so quickly when you couldn't work through one mistake with me. I guess some people are just more important to you than others. And there it was, the victim complex emerging from beneath the therapeutic language. She couldn't maintain the enlightened ex-girlfriend act when confronted with evidence that I was thriving without her. The difference, I said calmly, is that Rachel respects me and our relationship. She doesn't grind on her ex-boyfriends at weddings and then call it a mistake. You're never going to let that go, are you? The mask was completely off now, her voice rising with familiar indignation. It was one night, Nathan. One stupid, drunken moment that you've turned into this huge betrayal. It wasn't one moment, Sophia. It was months of you comparing me to Blake, making me feel inadequate, and gradually checking out of our relationship. The wedding was just when you finally showed everyone else what I already knew. She tried to rally with more therapeutic insights about growth and forgiveness, but the conversation had revealed exactly what I'd expected. She hadn't changed at all. She was still the same entitled, manipulative person who thought she deserved endless chances because she could articulate psychological concepts she'd learned in therapy. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said, preparing to end the call. But it's not going to be with me. I'm with someone who values what I bring to a relationship instead of constantly looking for something better. Fine, she snapped, her true feelings finally emerging. But don't come crawling back when your perfect little architect gets bored with your predictable routine. Some of us need more excitement than you'll ever be able to provide. I hung up and immediately blocked the number, feeling nothing but relief that I'd escaped a relationship with someone so fundamentally selfish and destructive. A year later, Rachel and I were engaged, living in our new house with plans for a summer wedding that would be everything Emma's ceremony had been: genuine, respectful, and focused on actual love rather than drama and attention-seeking. I never heard from Sophia again, though mutual friends occasionally mentioned seeing her around the city, apparently still single and still posting inspirational quotes about knowing your worth. I genuinely hoped she'd eventually find the excitement she thought she needed, but I was grateful it would never again be at my expense.